The first hard freeze of the year had locked the little lake town of Hollis Bay, Idaho, in white the morning they brought the old dog in to die. Dr. Sam Avery had put 100 animals to sleep in 15 years of practice and had carried wounded working dogs out of a war before that, and his hands did not shake. On the steel table lay a gray-muzzled German shepherd named Duke, and beside him stood an old man with one hand laid flat against the dog's ribs. And in the last quiet moment before the needle, the dog turned his head and licked that hand. Slowly, twice, the way you comfort someone. And Sam Avery, looking down, went cold because the animal under his hands was not dying, and every instinct that 15 years and one tour overseas had built in him was suddenly screaming. So, what stopped his hand that morning, and what he uncovered in the days that followed, would drag into the daylight what one family had quietly done to an old man the whole town believed was being looked after. Stay with me all the way through this one. And if you're new to this channel, subscribe now because this is the kind of story we tell here, and you'll want to be here for what comes after. To understand why a steady-handed man froze, you have to understand what those hands had done before. Sam Avery had spent 4 years in the Army Veterinary Corps, the small and little-known branch that cares for the military's working dogs, and he had knelt in the dirt of a forward base patching up animals that were braver than most men he knew. He had learned in that work to read a dog's body the way a medic reads a pulse. The gums, the eyes, the set of the spine, the 1,000 small tells that say whether something is shutting down or simply tired. He came home from all of it, carrying a quiet he did not talk about and a habit of expecting the worst. And he opened a small practice in a lake town because he thought a slower life might let him set some of the weight down. Part of that weight had a name. There had been a dog overseas, a Malinois called Bo, that Sam had worked on for 3 hours on a folding table under a generator light and had not been able to save, and the handler, a kid of 20, had sat on the floor of that tent afterward and wept in a way Sam had never been able to forget. He had told himself in the years since that he had done everything that could be done. He believed it mostly, but it had left him with a thing he could not put down, a refusal bordering on stubbornness to let a dog die on his table while there was still a single question unanswered. It mostly had let him set the rest of the weight down. He had a good tech named Maria and a waiting room full of farm dogs and barn cats, and he had stopped flinching at loud sounds, mostly. What he had never stopped being able to do was tell in a single look when a dog was dying, and the dog on his table was not. The old man was Walt Hennessy, 78, and Sam knew him the way you know everyone in a town that size. To nod to at the hardware store, not much more. Walt had been a sheriff's deputy in that county for 31 years, most of them as a K-9 officer, and there had been a time when his name meant something to every kid who ever got walked home instead of locked up. His wife, Eleanor, had died 4 winters back, and after that the town had watched Walt get smaller the way the lonely do, until a nephew turned up to help, and people stopped seeing much of Walt at all and told themselves he was being taken care of. He had been a big man once. The man standing at Sam's table was stooped and thin inside a coat that no longer fit him, and his hands trembled, and he would not quite meet anyone's eyes. And he had come to put down the last living thing that loved him because he had been told it was the kind thing to do. The dog was the reason Walt had kept getting up at all. Duke was 13, gray to the eyes now, with stiff hips and a cloudy left eye and a heart Sam would find as strong as a drum. But Duke had not started as Walt's dog. Duke had belonged to Ray Bishop, Walt's patrol partner of 19 years, the man who was best man at his wedding and godfather to the children Walt and Eleanor never got to have. The two of them had come up through the department together, had pulled each other out of more bad nights than either kept count of, and had made the kind of promises men make to each other in patrol cars at 3 a.m, that whoever went first, the other would look after what was left. Ray had been killed on a county road one black February night when a traffic stop went wrong, and his dog, locked in the back of the cruiser, had howled until someone let him out, and had ridden home in Walt's truck that night and never left it. Walt had kept his promise the only way that was left to keep it. For the last years of both their careers, Walt and Duke had worked the county together, an old man and a dead man's dog, and they had retired together, and they had buried Eleanor together, and now they were here. Have you ever loved a dog so loyal that it tried to comfort you even while it was the one being hurt? If a dog like that has ever been part of your life, put his name in the comments below. I read every one, The faithful ones should be remembered out loud. Sam should have set the syringe down already. Instead, he heard himself say quietly that he wanted to look the dog over first, just to be sure, the way he always did. It was not the way he always did. He ran his hands over Duke's body, and the dog led him, calm and trusting. And what Sam found was an old dog and nothing more. Arthritic, half-blind, slow, but with clear lungs and a steady heart, and bright, aware eyes that tracked the old man's face across the room, as if checking on him. There was no tumor under his hands, no wasting, no pain when he pressed. This was not a dog with weeks to live. This was a dog with a year or two of warm floors and short walks left in him, and Sam Avery had nearly ended it on someone's say-so. "Mr. Hennessy," he said, keeping his voice even, "who told you Duke was sick?" That was the moment the story turned, though the room was so quiet you could hear the freezer hum. Walt's answer came slow and confused. The vet in the next town over had run tests. He said his nephew had handled it all. The papers had said it was cancer. Said Duke was suffering and it was selfish to let him linger. Said the new place Walt was moving to wouldn't take a dog anyway, and this was the merciful way. Walt produced from his coat a single folded sheet of paper, and Sam unfolded it and read it twice. It was a printout on a letterhead from a clinic 40 miles away, and it said the words "Cancer and Humane Euthanasia recommended," but it carried no test results, no imaging, no blood work, no diagnosis a real veterinarian would ever sign. Just a conclusion, floating there, with no medicine underneath it. Sam had seen the truth and the lie at the same time, the way he'd been trained to, and he did not say so yet. He simply folded the paper back up, and he told Walt Hennessy gently that he would not be putting this dog down today, and that he'd like to keep Duke overnight to run real tests free of charge before anyone did anything that could not be undone. What he did over the next 2 days, he did quietly, because the truth laid out plainly in front of the right people has always been stronger than money or bluster. He ran the blood work himself, and it came back clean. He called the clinic on the letterhead, and a confused office manager told him they had no patient named Duke and had never issued that page. He made one call to a deputy he trusted, a younger man named Cole Reyes, who had joined the department idolizing the legend of old Walt Hennessy and his dog, and asked him, off the record, to look into who held power of attorney over Walt and what was happening to his house. And what Cole found tightened the whole thing into focus. Walt's nephew, a man named Dennis Carmody, held a power of attorney signed 8 months earlier, when Walt was deep in grief and would have signed anything put in front of a kind face. Carmody was underwater on his own debts in another state. Walt's small house sat on a half-acre of lakefront that had quietly become worth a great deal of money. And there was a sale, Cole told him, set to close that Friday, 3 days out, with a clause that the property be delivered vacant. An old man in a facility and a dog in the ground were the last 2 boxes left to check. Sam sat with that a long time after Cole hung up. He thought about Bo and the kid on the 10th floor and the promise he had made to himself in that war that he would never again let something helpless slip away while he had a hand free to stop it. He thought about a forged piece of paper and a clean blood panel, and a man with 3 days left before a house he had lived in for 50 years was sold out from under him. And he understood that this had stopped being a question of one dog the moment he refused to set the needle down. There was a clock running now, and it was not running in Walt Hennessy's favor. If you had been standing where Sam Avery stood, holding a syringe over a healthy animal, with a piece of paper in your other hand that told you to use it, would you have stopped to ask questions? Or would you have done what the paperwork said and gone home? Be honest with yourself. Type stop or proceed in the comments. I read every one. Sam stopped, and then he did not let it go. He had spent a war learning that you do not leave the helpless to the people who would use them, and he was not about to start now over a county line and a property deal. He kept Duke safe at the clinic, and he went to see Walt at the small rented room Carmody had already moved him into, and the visit told Sam more than any document could. The room was cold. The heat was turned down to nothing to save $1 that wasn't Sam's, to question and clearly wasn't being spent on Walt. The old man's pill bottles outnumbered his groceries. On the windowsill, just out of reach, sat a cell phone Walt was no longer allowed to use freely, and when it buzzed once, Walt reached for it without thinking, and then drew his hand back, the way a man does who has been taught a thing is not his anymore. Sam saw all of it and named none of it. He simply sat with the old man a while and asked him about Ray Bishop and watched something come back into Walt's face that had been gone a long time. The reckoning came Thursday, the day before the sale was to close, and it came the way these things do. The villain walked in on his own. Dennis Carmody arrived at the clinic mid-morning, sharp-jawed and impatient, having learned that the dog he'd paid to be gone was still very much alive, and he came in talking the way men do who have always been able to talk their way through. He had papers, he said. He had authority. The dog was his uncle's property and his uncle's affairs were his to manage, and he wanted the animal euthanized today as arranged. And he did not appreciate a small-town vet inserting himself into a family matter. Maria had quietly brought Walt to the clinic that morning to see Duke. The old man was sitting in the corner of the exam room with his hand on the dog's head. Cole Reyes stood in the doorway in his uniform, having found a reason to be there. And there was a third witness Carmody hadn't counted on. Old Marjorie from the diner, Walt's neighbor of 40 years, who had heard and come. Duke rose. The old dog got up off the floor on his stiff hips and put himself between Walt's chair and the man in the doorway, and from somewhere deep in his chest came a low, unbroken growl. Not a bark, not panic, but a decision a working dog made long ago, and had simply been waiting to need. Carmody took a step into the room. The dog took a step first. Carmody stopped, and in that stillness the old man in the corner spoke, in a voice gone thin but suddenly clear, looking not at his nephew but at the floor. They made me choose between us. No one moved. Even the dog did not move. Then Sam Avery spoke, and his voice was low and level, the voice of a man who had learned in hard places that the truest authority never has to be raised. He did not shout, and he did not accuse. He laid it out in order, the way you brief a thing that cannot be taken back. He named the letterhead and the clinic that had never written it. He named the clean blood work. He set the forged page on the counter next to the real test results, side by side so the room could see the size of the lie. He named the cold, rented room and the unspent money in the sale closing the next morning that required a vacant house. He did not raise his voice once, and the deputy in the doorway had his notebook out, and Dennis Carmody's certainty drained out of his face, the way color leaves a man who has just understood that the thing he thought was private has been seen by a room full of people. Carmody tried, once, the thing men like him always try, that he had only been doing the responsible thing, that no one else had stepped up, that an old man and a dying dog were a burden somebody had to carry. And for the length of one breath, it almost sounded like a reason, because there was a sliver of a frightened, indebted, ordinary man buried somewhere under it. Then he looked at his uncle in the corner with his hand on a dog that had been ready to die rather than leave him. And the reason died in his mouth. He left. The dog watched the door until it closed, and only then lay back down across Walt Hennessy's feet. The deepest part of it came out after in the quiet when the room had emptied. Sam asked Walt finally why he had agreed to any of it, and Walt told him the rest, that he had not been able to bear the thought of being taken away to a place where the dog could not follow, of Duke ending his days confused in a shelter cage, wondering where Walt had gone. After everything that dog had given, he had decided, in his grief and his confusion, that it was kinder to let the dog go first, while Walt could still hold him, than to abandon him at the end. And there was more underneath even that, which Walt said with his eyes down and his hand never leaving the gray fur. He had promised Ray Bishop across a hospital bed and then across a grave that he would take care of that dog as long as the dog drew breath. And somewhere in the long fog after Eleanor died, he had come to believe that he was failing that promise, that a poor, sick old man with nothing left was no kind of keeper for Ray's dog, and that the last act of faith he could manage was to make sure Duke's end was gentle and witnessed and loved, instead of cold and alone after Walt was gone. It was the worst decision and the most loving one, both at once, and it was the kind of thing only a man who had spent his whole life being the one who protected others would ever talk himself into. Sam Avery, who had carried his own dead dog out of a war, understood it better than he wished he did. What happened over the next weeks moved through Hollis Bay, the slow, certain way the truth moves, in a small town, in the diner, and the church basement, and the bait shop and the phone calls made late at night. The power of attorney was revoked, and the sale collapsed, and Dennis Carmody left the county ahead of the questions that followed him. Deputy Cole Reyes, who had grown up on stories of Walt and his dog, made it his business to see the old man home to his own house. and turned the heat back on himself. The little county sheriff's association, hearing that one of their own had nearly lost everything in the dark, did what such brotherhoods do. They organized, and they showed up. And within a month, Walt Hennessy's affairs were untangled and his house was his again, and his cupboards were full. And somebody had quietly built a ramp over his front steps so an old man and an old dog could both get up them. Men who had served under Walt 40 years ago drove in from 3 counties just to shake his hand and tell him they remembered. A photograph went up on the wall of the sheriff's office that week, a young Walt and a young Ray Bishop in their uniforms, with a German shepherd sitting at attention between them, and no one who worked there will tell you they walked past it without slowing down. There are turns in a life that feel less like coincidence than like arrangement. That of all the clinics in that county, Walt had been steered to the one vet whose eye had been trained on the far side of the world to know a living dog from a dying one. A man does not have to know the word for that to feel it settle in his chest. Sam Avery did not just hand the dog back and move on either. He had set a great deal of weight down when he came to that lake town, but he had also, he realized, set down some things he should have kept. The company of men who understood, the work of standing between the helpless and the people who would use them. So, he started driving out to Walt's place on his slow afternoons, ostensibly to check on Duke's hips, really to sit on the porch and let an old deputy tell him about Ray Bishop and the county roads and the dog that had ridden home in a truck one black February night and never left. On most mornings now, there are 3 at that house when the sun comes up over the lake. An old man, a younger one, and a gray-faced shepherd asleep in the first warm light, his heart still beating like a drum. What Sam Avery did that morning was not extraordinary in the way we usually mean the word. He had the same hands and the same long day ahead that any vet in any small town has. He simply did not let a piece of paper do his looking for him. He set the needle down, and he looked, and he saw the truth, and he refused to be a part of a lie because it was easier. And there is the other thing, the thing that froze him and that he carried with him after. In the last moment before he was meant to die, a loyal old dog had spent what he believed was his final breath, not on fear, but on comforting the broken man who had brought him there. That is what loyalty looks like when it is real. It does not keep score. It does not ask whether it is deserved. It simply turns its head and licks the hand and forgives. This story is for every faithful soul who keeps loving past all reason, and for everyone who has ever refused to look away from a quiet wrong that would have been so much easier to ignore. Was there ever a dog in your life who loved you better than you felt you deserved? Or someone somewhere who stepped in for you when no one else would? Put their name in the comments below. Let's fill this section with the loyal ones and the brave ones, and leave it there for people to find. Every story on this channel is about the people and the dogs the world walks past without truly seeing. If that means something to you, subscribe. So you're here for the next one. There are more of these stories to tell. And before you go, which moment in this one stayed with you the most? I'll see you in the comments.